step aside. I've got a John Doe and a Bolo. I don't need warrants.
Lower your voice and leave this room.
He matches my suspect. I'm taking him now.
This is a hospital. You don't have jurisdiction here.
Keep blocking me and you're coming downtown too.
You really want to do
I don't
this
care who you think you are.
Then you should, because I'm federal. This patient's under protective custody.
At precisely 11:42 p.m. on a Friday night in Chicago, a city police officer entered a hospital intensive care unit and tried to question a patient who had just come out of surgery. He did not have a warrant. He had not coordinated with hospital leadership. He did not know who the patient actually was. And within minutes, his entire 23-year career would begin to fall apart on hospital security video that would later be shown during his disciplinary hearing and replayed in law enforcement training rooms nationwide as a lesson in what happens when officers ignore federal authority. The person stopping him was not a doctor and not hospital security. He was a black FBI agent with 15 years of experience investigating organized crime and a clear understanding of where local power stopped and federal authority started. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, please tap that subscribe button. What happens next is a textbook example of professional authority, and you won't want to miss even a moment of it. Special Agent Terrence Blake was not a typical 38-year-old. While many people his age were focused on office promotions or comfortable routines, Terrence had earned a reputation as one of the Chicago FBI office's most skilled organized crime investigators. He focused on complicated federal cases that demanded patience, accuracy, and a deep understanding of criminal systems that went far beyond simple street arrests. Terrence grew up on Chicago's South Side, raised by a postal worker father and a public school teacher mother. He watched his community struggle under gang violence and drug networks. He saw smart young people pulled into dangerous lives because they believed they had no other path. He even witnessed his cousin badly injured in gang violence when Terrence was only 16. He watched honest people lose faith in the system meant to protect them. That upbringing shaped every choice he made afterward. Terrence graduated from Northwestern University with a criminal justice degree at the top of his class. He went straight to the FBI Academy in Quantico, finishing in the top 5% of his training group. But what truly set Terrence apart wasn't just academic knowledge of the law. He understood people. He understood neighborhoods. He had lived in the same environments where criminal organizations operated. He knew the power structures, the economic pressures that fed illegal businesses, and how those networks actually worked from the inside. For the past 15 years, Terrence had focused on organized crime investigations. He helped dismantle human trafficking rings, money laundering operations, and drug networks stretching across multiple states. He played a key role in building cases against gang leaders who believed they were untouchable. And every case he built was designed to survive intense scrutiny from both federal prosecutors and defense attorneys. Terrence gravitated toward complex federal investigations because they required the careful, methodical approach that fit his strengths. Federal cases often take months or even years of surveillance, informants, financial tracing, and documentation. Putting together evidence strong enough to persuade a federal grand jury demands patience and precision. And once the FBI commits serious time and resources to a case, they do not allow outside interference. Which brings us back to that Friday night in November. Terrence had spent 14 months working an investigation into a drug distribution network operating throughout Chicago. The group moved controlled substances through street-level dealers and had suspected links to suppliers and money laundering operations. Several individuals were already under investigation. Some were facing imminent federal charges as part of a coordinated enforcement action. One of those individuals was Kevin Torres, age 29, believed to be a mid-level player in the operation. He wasn't leadership, but he was positioned close enough that his cooperation could unlock valuable intelligence on higher-ranking figures. Terrence had spent months slowly earning Kevin's trust, laying out the strength of the evidence, explaining his legal risks, and offering the possibility of cooperation in exchange for leniency at sentencing. 2 days earlier, Kevin had signaled his willingness to cooperate. Kevin told agents he was ready to provide information to help federal investigators understand the organization's structure in exchange for a cooperation agreement and possible witness protection. This was a major breakthrough. Kevin could offer insight the FBI had spent months trying to confirm. He could name key players, explain operations, and possibly testify. His cooperation had the potential to significantly strengthen the federal case. Then on that same Friday night, Kevin was shot. Around 9:00 p.m., as he exited a convenience store, someone in a passing vehicle fired multiple rounds. Kevin was hit twice, once near the shoulder and once in the torso. He was rushed to Chicago Metro Hospital and taken into emergency surgery. Doctors said he would live, but he needed close monitoring in the intensive care unit due to internal injuries and possible complications. He was expected to remain hospitalized for several days. Terrence received the call at 9:47 p.m. He was at home reviewing case files when his phone rang. Another agent from his team, who had been monitoring Kevin for safety, told him Kevin had been shot and was in surgery. At that point, it was unclear whether the shooting was retaliation for his cooperation or unrelated street violence. Terrence reached the hospital within 20 minutes. He coordinated with hospital security, placed agents at strategic points, and informed staff that the patient was part of a federal investigation and that access must be cleared through the FBI. Kevin came out of surgery around 11:15 p.m. He was stable but sedated, hooked up to medical equipment in a private ICU room. Terrence stayed close, managing his team and confirming security measures were in place. Then, at 11:42 p.m., Officer Raymond Cole arrived at the intensive care unit and moved toward Kevin's room. Raymond Cole was a Chicago Police Department officer with 23 years on the force. He worked in a specialized gang crimes unit, a role he had held for 8 years. Within the department, Raymond was known as aggressive and relentless, someone focused on results who didn't let procedures slow him down. But his background raised concerns. Over the previous 5 years, 9 citizen complaints had been filed against him alleging excessive force or misconduct. Each had been reviewed and dismissed as unsubstantiated. He had also been named in 3 civil lawsuits claiming civil rights violations. The city settled those cases for a reported 6-figure total, yet Raymond faced no serious discipline. Raymond had developed a policing style that favored arrests over strict legal accuracy. He believed that if someone looked involved in crime, the legal details could be handled later in court. That Friday night, Raymond had been investigating a shooting from 3 weeks earlier, a gang-related incident involving gunfire near a nightclub. Witnesses had provided a suspect description. Black male, late 20s, medium build, visible tattoos. It was a broad description that could apply to thousands of men across Chicago. Still, Raymond convinced himself he knew exactly who the suspect was. All he needed was to find him. When Raymond heard that a shooting victim matching that loose description had been taken to Chicago Metro Hospital, he chose to act. He didn't request a warrant. He didn't contact hospital leadership. He didn't inform a supervisor. He simply went to the hospital with his badge, fully intending to question or possibly arrest the patient. Raymond had no idea that Kevin Torres was under federal protection. He had no clue Kevin was cooperating in a federal case. He didn't know the FBI had spent more than a year building this investigation. And he didn't realize that the black man standing outside the hospital room in civilian clothes was a federal agent with full authority over the situation. When Raymond saw Terrence, he made an assumption that would cost him dearly. He saw a black man dressed casually and assumed he was hospital staff or maybe security. Definitely not someone who could limit a police officer's access. As Raymond stepped off the elevator, he noticed Terrence positioned outside the ICU room. Terrence wore jeans and a button-down shirt, but his FBI credentials were clearly visible on his belt. 2 other people nearby were also clearly law enforcement. Raymond saw Terrence and made a snap judgment based on appearance instead of facts. He saw a black man in casual clothes and assumed he was hospital staff or someone who wouldn't question police authority. He didn't look at the credentials. He didn't ask who Terrence was. He simply assumed control of the situation. He walked up confidently and stated he had information about a wanted suspect whose description matched the patient inside the room. He made it clear he believed no further permission was required. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever seen someone in power make assumptions they later regretted? Drop a comment below. Terrence responded calmly and firmly. He told Raymond to lower his voice and leave the area. It was a direct order, not a suggestion. Raymond wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not by a black man wearing civilian clothes. He argued that the patient matched his suspect description and said he intended to question him immediately. There was something in Raymond's tone, dismissive and confident, as if he expected Terrence to step aside. It was a tone Raymond had likely used many times with people he assumed wouldn't challenge him. Terrence recognized that tone well. He had encountered it repeatedly throughout his career. Terrence replied clearly, explaining that this was a hospital and Raymond had no authority to question the patient, not without proper authorization. Not without hospital coordination, not when the patient was under federal protection. Raymond's confidence started to crack. His posture shifted. He then threatened Terrence, stating that if Terrence continued to interfere, he would arrest him for obstruction of justice. That's when Terrence asked the question that should have made Raymond stop immediately. Do you really want to do this on camera? The intensive care unit was covered with security cameras. Every movement and every word was being recorded. Terrence knew it. Hospital staff knew it. Raymond either didn't realize or didn't care. His response revealed his mindset. He said he didn't care who Terrence claimed to be. Terrence then made the situation unmistakably clear. Then you should, because I'm federal. This patient is under protective custody and you need to leave. Those words, federal protective custody, should have instantly changed Raymond's understanding. Federal authority overrides local jurisdiction in federal cases. A patient under protective custody means access is tightly controlled. But Raymond had already committed to his path and his pride wouldn't let him step back. He tried to move past Terrence. Terrence didn't step aside. He raised his FBI credentials clearly so the cameras could capture them. He stated plainly, for the record, that he was Special Agent Terrence Blake with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and that the patient was protected as part of an active federal investigation. He warned Raymond that any attempt to question or access the patient without federal approval would be interference with a federal case. Raymond claimed he had a warrant. Terrence asked to see it. Raymond hesitated, then began scrolling through his phone. What he eventually showed was a department-wide alert from 3 weeks earlier describing a suspect. Black male, late 20s, medium-build, tattoos. Terrence reviewed the description, then glanced at Kevin Torres through the hospital window. Kevin had tattoos. So did a large portion of men his age in Chicago. The description was vague enough to fit hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Terrence asked Raymond what specific facts linked this patient to his case. Raymond replied that the description matched. Terrence explained that such a general description did not establish probable cause for questioning or arrest. Raymond insisted he had the authority to question the patient. Terrence explained that Raymond had no right to question a sedated ICU patient without voluntary consent, a valid warrant, or true exigent circumstances. None of those existed here. Raymond argued that this was a shooting victim, claiming that created exigent circumstances. Terrence explained that exigent circumstances apply only when there is an immediate threat to life or public safety. Kevin was post-surgery, stable, and under federal protection. There was no emergency justifying Raymond's actions. Raymond raised his voice and accused Terrence of obstructing his investigation. Terrence calmly pointed out that Raymond was interfering with a federal investigation, which carried serious legal and professional consequences. Then Raymond made the mistake that would define his career. He reached for his handcuffs and said he was arresting Terrence for obstruction. Terrence didn't move. He spoke loudly and clearly for the cameras. You are attempting to detain a federal agent protecting a subject in a federal investigation. I am advising you that this action constitutes interference with federal law enforcement. Stop immediately. Raymond didn't stop. He grabbed Terrence's arm. What followed was brief but critical. Terrence, trained in standard FBI defensive tactics, used a basic control technique to break Raymond's grip. Nothing excessive, nothing aggressive, just enough force to make Raymond release his hold. At the same moment, Terrence said firmly, "Remove your hand. You are not authorized to detain me." This is your final warning. Raymond's hand drifted toward his duty weapon. He didn't pull it out, but his hand rested on the holster. Several things unfolded at once. Terrence's backup agents, who had been watching from nearby, stepped forward and placed themselves between Raymond and Terrence. Hospital security rushed in, responding to the disturbance, and Terrence spoke with unmistakable authority. "Do not touch that weapon. If you draw on a federal agent, you will face severe consequences." "Step back now." Raymond froze. His hand stayed on the holster, but he did not draw. He looked around and saw FBI agents, hospital security, and cameras recording everything. Slowly, it began to sink in that he had made a serious error. Terrence ordered, "Take your hand off your weapon, step back 3 paces, and wait for your supervisor, who I am calling right now." Raymond complied, his face drained of color. The confidence was gone, replaced by the realization that he had just threatened a federal agent in the middle of a lawful operation, and every second was captured on video. Terrence pulled out his phone and contacted the Chicago Police Department liaison assigned to the FBI field office. The call was calm and to the point. Terrence identified himself, explained what had occurred, and requested that a supervisor respond immediately to the hospital regarding Officer Raymond Cole, who had attempted to interfere with a federal protective operation. About 15 minutes later, a Chicago PD captain arrived. His name was Gerald Martinez, a 28-year veteran of the department. He had worked alongside federal agencies before. He understood jurisdiction boundaries. He was familiar with Terrence Blake's professional reputation. When Gerald saw Raymond standing in the ICU hallway, surrounded by FBI agents and hospital security, visibly tense, he paused and took a slow breath. He immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. Gerald asked Terrence to explain what had happened. Terrence did so calmly and clearly. He explained that Kevin Torres was under federal protection, that Raymond had demanded access without authorization or coordination, that Raymond had threatened to arrest Terrence for lawfully restricting access, and that Raymond had physically grabbed his arm and reached toward his weapon when Terrence held his position. Gerald listened without interrupting. He then turned to Raymond and asked if the account was accurate. Raymond tried to justify himself. He referenced the suspect description. He said the patient matched it. He claimed he was simply doing his job. Gerald asked if Raymond had obtained a warrant. No. Had he coordinated with hospital staff or verified whether the patient was part of another investigation? No. Had he identified himself to the FBI agents or questioned their authority before trying to access the room? No. Gerald looked up at the security camera mounted on the ceiling and asked the hospital security supervisor if the entire incident had been recorded. The supervisor confirmed it had been captured from multiple angles with audio. Do you think the captain already knew this would define Raymond's career? Share your thoughts in the comments. Gerald instructed Raymond to surrender his duty weapon and return to the station immediately. Raymond began to protest. Gerald cut him off. Hand over your weapon now. You grabbed a federal agent and reached for your firearm on camera. This discussion is over. Raymond gave up his service weapon. Gerald escorted him toward the elevator. As the doors closed, Raymond's face showed real concern for the first time. The adrenaline faded and the weight of what had happened began to settle in. Terrence stayed at the hospital for several more hours, making sure Kevin remained secure and stable. He completed a detailed report for his supervisor at the FBI field office. He requested copies of all hospital security footage and documented every detail of the encounter. While events were still fresh, the FBI acted quickly and formally. By the next morning, a formal complaint had been filed with the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The complaint outlined Raymond's attempt to interfere with a federal investigation, his effort to unlawfully detain a federal agent, and his threatening conduct toward federal personnel. It also noted that Raymond's actions could potentially violate federal laws governing interference with federal law enforcement operations. The FBI stated it was not pursuing federal charges at that time, but made clear that decision depended on appropriate disciplinary action by Chicago PD. Internal Affairs opened an investigation immediately. They obtained the hospital security footage. They watched Raymond approach the ICU, ignore Terrence's credentials and authority, demand access to a federally protected subject, threaten Terrence with arrest, grab a federal agent, and reach for his weapon when that agent refused to back down. Investigators interviewed hospital staff who witnessed the incident. Each confirmed Terrence's account. Several described Raymond as loud, aggressive, and dismissive after being told he lacked authority. They interviewed the FBI agents present, all of whom confirmed Terrence had clearly identified himself, explained jurisdiction boundaries multiple times, and gave Raymond several chances to leave peacefully before the situation escalated. They also interviewed Raymond. His version of events shifted as the questioning continued. At first, he claimed his suspect description gave him authority. Later, he said he didn't know the patient was under federal protection. Then he suggested Terrence had been aggressive, forcing him to act defensively. Investigators asked whether the video footage would support his claims. Raymond said he couldn't remember exactly what happened because everything moved so fast. They reviewed the footage with him. It contradicted several parts of his story. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. The findings were detailed and troubling. Raymond had attempted to question a patient without consent, a warrant, or exigent circumstances. He had ignored clear identification from federal agents. He had threatened to arrest a federal agent who was lawfully doing his job. He had physically grabbed that agent. He had reached for his firearm in a way that could reasonably be seen as threatening. Each of these actions violated department policy. Several violated professional conduct standards. At least one exposed him to possible federal liability. The department recommended termination. Raymond's union representative attempted to intervene. They argued that Raymond acted based on a suspect description. They claimed he was unaware of the federal investigation. They suggested he felt endangered and was acting in self-defense. The disciplinary review board carefully reviewed the security footage. They found no evidence that Terrence posed any threat. They saw repeated warnings clearly given by Terrence that Raymond ignored. They saw Raymond escalate the encounter at every step. The termination decision was upheld. Raymond Cole's 23-year career ended because of a few minutes in a hospital hallway, but the fallout went further than losing his job. The Chicago Police Department reported Raymond's termination to the National Decertification Index, a database that tracks officers fired or forced to resign due to serious misconduct. Being listed in this system makes it extremely difficult to be hired as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the United States. Raymond appealed the decision. His appeal claimed federal agents overstepped their authority, that he had legitimate reasons to investigate, and that Terrence used excessive force when removing Raymond's hand from his arm. The appeal was denied. The board noted that video evidence showed Terrence using minimal and appropriate force to remove an unauthorized grip after Raymond had unlawfully grabbed him. They also emphasized that Raymond had no legal authority to demand access to a patient under federal protection who had not consented to questioning. Raymond then filed a civil lawsuit against the city alleging wrongful termination. The lawsuit was dismissed. Court ruled that Raymond's own statements, combined with clear security footage, justified termination based on violations of department rules and professional standards. 6 months after the hospital incident, Raymond Cole was working as a security officer at a commercial facility outside Chicago. His career in law enforcement was over. Terrence continued his federal work. Kevin Torres recovered from his injuries and formally entered a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. His information and testimony played a key role in a successful federal case that led to convictions of 14 individuals involved in the drug network, including multiple leaders who received lengthy federal sentences. The hospital incident later became a case study at the FBI Academy. New agents are shown the footage as an example of proper jurisdictional conduct and how to respond professionally when local officers interfere with federal operations. The video is now part of training modules focused on interagency cooperation and maintaining federal authority. The Chicago Police Department also added the footage to its own training program. Officers assigned to specialized units must review it annually as part of instruction on federal-local coordination and jurisdiction awareness. New protocols were introduced requiring officers to work with hospital administration and confirm federal involvement before questioning hospitalized patients. Let's look at what went wrong here and why it matters beyond this single event. This story isn't just about one officer's bad decisions. It's about what happens when assumptions replace established procedures. Raymond Cole had spent 23 years in law enforcement. He had worked countless investigations. He was used to people stepping aside when he showed his badge. He expected access and compliance as a matter of routine. But when Raymond saw Terrence standing outside that hospital room, he didn't just see someone restricting entry. He saw a black man in casual clothing. And despite FBI credentials clearly visible on Terrence's belt, despite other federal agents nearby, despite multiple signs that this was a federal operation, Raymond's assumptions about who held authority and who didn't took over. Those assumptions, influenced by bias, ended his career in minutes. Terrence understood jurisdiction because federal agents have no choice but to. Their work depends on it. They operate in environments where authority lines must be precise. They coordinate constantly with local, state, and federal partners. They document everything because federal prosecutors will reject cases with even small jurisdictional flaws. But Terrence understood something else as well. As a black man in law enforcement, he knew his authority would often be questioned regardless of credentials. He had experienced it repeatedly. Local officers assuming he was a suspect instead of an agent. People expressing surprise at his role. Defense attorneys trying to undermine his credibility. Because of that, Terrence learned to be exceptionally prepared, consistently professional, and unmistakably clear about his authority. He knew that some people would judge his appearance before recognizing his position. That is exactly what happened in that hospital hallway. Here's a question for you. If you were a hospital administrator, what policies would you put in place after an incident like this? Share your thoughts below. The hospital's security footage proved essential. Without it, this would have been one officer's word against another's. Both professionals, both backed by institutions. The department might have sought a compromise, possibly issuing a suspension instead of termination. But the cameras recorded everything. Raymond's aggression, Terrence's calm professionalism, the The repeated warnings, the physical escalation, the hand moving toward the weapon, all captured clearly from multiple angles with audio. The footage also showed something beyond the confrontation itself. It showed hospital staff and patients watching in the background. It showed disruption to medical care. It showed concern on faces when Raymond reached for his gun. That evidence made it impossible to argue that Raymond's actions were reasonable. This case also exposes a deeper issue in law enforcement: the cost of ignoring patterns of troubling behavior. Raymond had 9 excessive force complaints in 5 years. 3 lawsuits settled by the city. Yet he faced no meaningful discipline. The department protected him. Complaints were dismissed. Lawsuits were settled quietly. Accountability was avoided. He was allowed to continue using an aggressive, procedure-light approach until it led to an incident too serious to ignore. Had the department addressed Raymond's pattern earlier, this incident might never have happened. He might have received additional training. He might have been reassigned. He might have faced corrective discipline that changed his behavior before it escalated to something this severe and well-documented. Instead, he was shielded until his actions left no alternative but termination. Finally, let's address a common argument in situations like this. Some claim Terrence was being territorial, that he could have handled it more gently, that allowing brief access might have avoided conflict. That view is flawed. Terrence had spent 14 months building a federal case. He had invested thousands of hours of work. He had multiple federal agents assigned to safeguard his cooperating witness. Kevin Torres had just been shot, possibly because his cooperation was suspected or discovered. Terrence's responsibility was never to satisfy Raymond's unauthorized demands. His duty was to protect his subject and preserve the integrity of the federal case. He identified himself clearly. He explained the jurisdiction issue. He gave Raymond multiple chances to walk away. When Raymond refused and then grabbed him, Terrence responded in a controlled and professional manner. That wasn't territorial behavior. That was the proper execution of federal law enforcement duties. So what lessons come from this incident? First, understand jurisdictional limits. If you work in law enforcement, you must know exactly where your authority starts and where it stops. Know when a warrant is required. Know when coordination with other agencies is necessary. Know when your actions may interfere with another investigation. Second, recognize and respect credentials. When someone presents federal identification and explains their authority, take it seriously. Don't assume you know more. Don't let ego override procedure. Third, practice de-escalation. Raymond had several chances to reconsider his approach. Each time Terrence gave him an off-ramp, Raymond chose to escalate instead. That's how routine encounters become career-ending moments. Fourth, always assume you're being recorded. Hospitals, security systems, body cameras, and phones are everywhere. In almost any public space, your actions are likely being documented. Fifth, address warning patterns early. Raymond's 9 complaints and 3 lawsuits were clear signals the department failed to take seriously. Organizations must identify and correct problematic behavior before it turns into a major incident. Today, Raymond Cole is no longer in law enforcement. He lost his appeal related to pension benefits and now receives reduced retirement pay based on his years of service. He later filed for bankruptcy due to legal costs from appeals and lawsuits. He has made no public statements and has not spoken openly about the incident. Terrence Blake, meanwhile, was promoted to supervisory special agent 2 years after the hospital encounter. He now leads a team handling complex federal investigations across the Midwest. He has not given public interviews about the confrontation, though he discusses it in training sessions with new agents. Following the incident, the Chicago Police Department revised its hospital investigation policies. Officers are now required to coordinate with hospital administration and confirm federal involvement before questioning patients. Department also introduced a stronger early warning system to flag officers with repeated complaints or civil litigation. The federal case Kevin Torres assisted with is now considered one of the most successful organized crime prosecutions in recent Chicago history. 14 convictions, major asset seizures, and significant disruption of drug distribution networks across the region. None of that would have been possible if Terrence had backed down when Raymond made unauthorized demands. None of it would have happened if Raymond had been allowed to compromise a federal witness. And none of it would have occurred if one FBI agent hadn't understood jurisdiction well enough to defend it. A few minutes in a hospital hallway. One local officer who believed his badge excused him from following protocol. One federal agent who knew better. And a 23-year career ended because authority was mistaken for unlimited power. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from this story that you didn't know before? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. This case matters because it shows that authority has clear limits. Police officers carry significant power, but that power is not absolute. It is restricted by jurisdiction, constitutional protections, federal authority, and the law itself. When officers forget those limits, when they assume their badge overrides everything else, they put themselves and their departments at risk. They damage investigations, they violate procedures, they destroy their own careers. Raymond Cole learned that lesson in the most expensive way possible, in a hospital hallway, on camera, in front of federal agents who fully understood their authority and how to enforce it. The footage from that night is still used in training. You can see a local officer trying to assert power he didn't have. You can see a federal agent calmly explaining jurisdictional rules. You can see the exact moment when assumptions replace sound judgment. And you can watch how a few minutes of poor decisions erase 23 years of service. Maybe the next time an officer considers pushing past someone who explains they don't have jurisdiction, they'll remember this case. They'll remember Raymond Cole. They'll remember that authority has boundaries, and crossing them has consequences. This is the story of how a Chicago police officer tried to access a federally protected subject and lost everything. But more than that, it's a story about jurisdiction, accountability, and why understanding the limits of your authority is just as important as knowing how to use it. Thanks for watching all the way through. If you found this valuable, make sure you're subscribed, because I share more stories like this that deserve to be told. Drop a comment and tell me what you think should happen in cases like these. See you in the next one.